The rain started earlier than the forecast promised. By dusk, the wind was clawing at the old siding of Addison's rental house, and the air had that metallic tension that always came before lightning. The kind that made your skin buzz. She'd been working at her kitchen table, half listening to a true crime podcast, when the first flash turned the entire room white. Then came the thunder, slow, rolling, like the sky was grinding its teeth. She checked her phone. 8:42 p.m. The power hadn't gone out yet, but her lamp flickered, the kind of weak pulse you'd see in a hospital monitor right before the line goes flat. Across the street, every other house had gone dark. She could see the faint glow of flashlights moving behind curtains. Her house was the only one still lit. At first, it felt lucky. Then, odd. The hum started under the floorboards, a deep vibration, like a refrigerator motor running through the entire foundation. Addison paused her podcast. The hum didn't stop. It almost sounded like it responded to the silence, growing louder, as if aware it had her attention. She went to the basement door and listened. The sound was stronger there, low and rhythmic, with a faint resonance that seemed to echo from behind the walls rather than beneath them. When lightning struck again, she thought she saw movement, shadows that didn't belong to anything in the room. By 9:30 p.m., the storm had swallowed the neighborhood. Wind howled against the windows, rain beat like nails on the roof, and Addison's lights still refused to die. Every appliance hummed louder than it should. The fridge, the oven clock, even the cheap desk lamp in the corner. She called the power company. "Hi, I'm at 228 Meadow Ridge Lane. Everyone's out but me. I just want to make sure there's no—" The operator interrupted. "You said 228 Meadow Ridge?" "Yes." There was a pause, long enough for static to hiss through the phone. "Ma'am, that property isn't connected to our active grid. You're not supposed to have power right now." Addison frowned. "That's impossible. I'm staring at my kitchen light." "Then you should leave the house immediately. There's no electrical line running there anymore. The line went dead." Addison stared at her phone, the words looping in her head. No line running there anymore. Another flash of lightning burst through the window, illuminating the kitchen walls, and for half a second, the wallpaper seemed to ripple, like fabric stirred by wind. Behind the pattern of faded roses, something darker pressed out, tracing the outline of fingers before fading back into stillness. Addison grabbed a flashlight and headed for the basement door. If the hum was coming from faulty wiring or some kind of generator, she needed to see it. The steps creaked as she descended, each one bending slightly under her weight. The air was colder down there, thick with the smell of wet earth and old insulation. Her light swept across cardboard boxes and the shadow of the furnace. The hum pulsed now, steady, like a heartbeat buried deep inside the walls. She found the breaker panel and opened it, every switch already flipped off. Still, the hum persisted, even stronger when she stood close to the wall. She pressed her hand against the concrete and felt it vibrate beneath her palm, warm and alive. She took a step back, her beam catching on something small wedged near the baseboard, an old metal tag, half covered in dust. She brushed it clean. It read, "Clark Electric Company, established 1957. Her last name. She didn't have family in Ohio. Before she could think, lightning flashed again. The overhead bulb flickered on for just a second. In that brief, blinding moment, she saw figures, dozens of them, standing in the far corner, half formed by shadow and dust, all facing her. Then the light went out. Addison ran upstairs, heart pounding. The storm outside had reached its peak, thunder crashing like gunfire across the sky. Yet inside, every light still burned steady, every bulb glowing brighter than before. She covered her ears, but the hum had risen into a low, mechanical drone, vibrating through her bones. The walls trembled in rhythm. The entire house seemed to breathe. She stumbled into the living room, and that's when she noticed the photographs on the wall. old black and white portraits she hadn't hung there. Families, workers, men in utility uniforms. Clark Electric Company was printed on every one of their jackets. Their faces were calm, serious, eyes staring straight ahead. But when lightning flashed again, every head in the photographs had turned slightly, to face her. The sound of the hum grew almost unbearable. A whisper folded inside it now, distorted and layered, repeating something over and over. She could barely make it out. "We kept the lights on for you." Addison dropped the flashlight and backed toward the front door. The knob was hot, too hot to touch. She yanked her sleeve over her hand and pulled it open. The storm was blinding, rain whipping sideways, but just beyond her porch, every other house remained dark, except hers. Her windows glowed gold from inside, like a beacon. When Addison woke, the storm had passed. She didn't remember falling asleep. The air was still, heavy with the smell of ozone. Every light was off. She stepped outside, shivering in her damp clothes. Neighbors were cleaning debris from their lawns, cursing the blackout. She asked one of them, a man with a baseball cap and coffee mug, what time the power had come back. He looked at her strangely. "It hasn't. They said it'll be out till tomorrow." Addison glanced back at her house. It looked perfectly normal, silent, still. She went back inside, walked through the quiet rooms. No hum, no flicker. Then, as she reached the kitchen, she saw it. Faint soot marks burned into the wall, in the shape of two human hands pressed flat against the plaster. Her phone buzzed. A voicemail notification blinked on the screen. She pressed play. Static, then a deep, familiar voice. "Thank you for keeping the current alive." The call log read, "Unknown number, Clark Electric Company." The storm came fast that night, faster than anyone expected. The forecast had mentioned rain, maybe thunder, but by 9 o'clock the whole town of Millbrook was swallowed in a black sky. Rain lashed at the windows like handfuls of gravel. Thunder didn't rumble, it snapped, sharp and close. Each flash of lightning turned the entire street white for an instant, and every house vanished again into darkness. 13-year-old Ethan Miller stood by the living room window, ignoring his mother's warnings. "Don't stand too close," she had said earlier. "Lightning likes to find curious kids." But curiosity was his nature. He liked how storms made the world look unreal, like time paused between the flashes. He pressed his forehead against the glass, watching the water stream down in crooked trails. That's when he saw her. At first, she looked like a shape in the rain, maybe a reflection. But when the lightning struck again, she was there, standing under the oak tree in the yard. A girl about his age, maybe a little older. Long, dark hair plastered against her face, a pale dress clinging to her body, and no umbrella, no shoes. She just stood there, barefoot, staring straight at the house. Ethan blinked. The next flash of lightning came 5 seconds later. She was gone. He squinted through the dark, heart pounding. Maybe she'd moved, or maybe he imagined her. Then thunder rolled again, and she reappeared, closer this time, halfway between the tree and the porch. Her face was tilted up now, and in the light, her eyes looked blank. Ethan stumbled backward from the window, pulse racing. The lights flickered once, twice, and the house plunged into shadow. The storm outside didn't let up, but the silence inside felt worse. His mother's voice echoed faintly from the kitchen. "Ethan?" But he couldn't answer. He was still watching the window. The next flash came, and she was gone again. Power outages weren't new in Millbrook, but tonight felt different. The air inside the house buzzed faintly, like static before a radio broadcast. Ethan's mother, Laura Miller, lit a candle and set it on the coffee table, her face tight with worry. She'd always hated storms. Her husband had died in one, years back, when his truck spun off a rain-slick road. Ethan sat beside her, silent, pretending to read the flickering patterns on the wall. He didn't mention the girl. He wasn't sure what he'd seen. and the memory already felt like something half-dreamed. Then came the knock. 3 dull thuds on the front door. Not frantic, not polite, just steady. Laura frowned. Who on earth? She glanced at Ethan. Stay here. She took the candle and crossed the living room. The knocking came again, louder this time. When she reached for the handle, Ethan's throat went dry. Something inside him screamed, "Don't open it." Laura pulled the door slightly ajar, and a rush of cold, wet air spilled in. "Hello?" she called into the storm. No answer. She opened it wider. No one there. Just rain, wind, and the sound of thunder rolling off the hills. She shut it quickly, locking it out of habit. When she turned around, Ethan was still watching her. "Nobody?" he asked, voice thin. "Nobody," she said, forcing a smile. But when she set the candle back on the table, her hand trembled. She hadn't told Ethan that for a split second, before the lightning faded, she thought she saw someone standing by the gate. A girl, drenched and barefoot. Upstairs, a window creaked open on its own. Ethan couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house seemed louder now. The creak of wood, the ticking of rain against the roof, the slow groan of thunder in the distance. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling until a faint tap, tap, tap reached his ears. It wasn't the sound of rain. It was sharper, closer. He sat up. The tapping came from his bedroom window. Lightning flashed, and for the briefest second he saw her again, the girl, standing just outside the glass, soaked to the bone, her face pale as chalk. Her hair was plastered to her cheeks, and her lips moved soundlessly, forming words he couldn't hear. Ethan screamed. The lights flickered back on, bright and blinding, and when his mother burst into the room seconds later, the window was closed, curtains drawn. "What happened?" she demanded. "She was there," he gasped. "The girl, she was looking at me." Laura knelt beside him, holding his shoulders. "Ethan, there's no one outside. It's just the storm playing tricks on you. Go back to bed." But he couldn't. Not after what he'd seen. Because when the lightning struck again, he'd caught a glimpse of her reflection. And in the reflection, she wasn't outside the house. She was standing behind him. Downstairs, the TV turned itself on, static hissing through the empty room. Through the faint snow of the screen, a distorted image flickered. A girl's face, expression blank, eyes wide and white. Outside, the thunder rolled again, low and endless. By morning, the storm had passed, but the world outside looked washed out, pale, almost too quiet. Laura brewed coffee with trembling hands, pretending not to notice how tired her son looked. His eyes were red, his voice small. "You believe me, right?" he asked softly. She didn't answer right away. She'd spent half the night sitting awake, remembering something she had buried for years. Another night, another storm, and another child. When Ethan was just 3 years old, he'd had a brother, Daniel. He'd been 5 when he went missing. They lived in the same house then, in the same neighborhood, and the night he disappeared, the same kind of storm had torn through Millbrook. Laura had gone to check on him after a crash of thunder. His bed was empty, his window open, his tiny footprints leading out into the rain. They never found him. The police said maybe he wandered off, maybe he drowned. But Laura remembered something else. That night, she had looked out the window and seen a small figure standing by the oak tree, barefoot, drenched, staring back at the house. When Ethan told her about the girl, her stomach turned cold. It wasn't the first time something had watched their family through a storm. She looked at her son and finally said, "If you see her again, don't let her in." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Laura didn't answer. She just turned toward the window. The morning sky had begun to darken again. Thunder rumbled faintly over the hills, a second storm rolling in. That night, the rain came harder than before. Power flickered twice, then died completely. The whole street disappeared into darkness. Laura lit a candle and told Ethan to stay near her, but he couldn't stop looking toward the window. Something inside him knew the girl would return. Every gust of wind against the house sounded like footsteps. Every flash of lightning drew the air tighter. Then came the knock again. 3 dull thuds. Laura froze. Ethan grabbed her hand. Neither of them moved. Then, another 3 knocks. Slower. Heavier. Lightning flashed through the curtains, and for one horrifying instant, they both saw her. The girl, standing on the porch, dripping wet, her eyes wide and glowing faintly in the light. She lifted her hand and pressed it against the glass. Ethan whispered, "Mom." "She looks like Daniel." Laura's knees went weak. Because he was right. Same face, same eyes. The child she'd lost, only older now, unchanged, watching. The candle went out. The hum of thunder filled the silence. And then the door creaked open on its own. When the neighbors found the house the next morning, both were gone. The lights were still off. The front door stood wide open, rain pooling inside. On the porch steps were 2 sets of bare footprints, one small, one larger, leading into the yard, stopping at the oak tree. And on the living room window, pressed faintly into the fogged glass, was the imprint of a child's hand. It was nearing 2 a.m., and the storm had swallowed the desert. Sheets of rain battered the long stretch of Route 89, turning the asphalt into a mirror of headlights and lightning flashes. Inside the lonely AM station on the outskirts of Flagstaff, Charles "Chuck" Danner, 42 and weary, leaned into the microphone, his voice echoing through empty airwaves. "You're tuned in to Nightline, Arizona," he said, tone calm and tired. "Looks like we've got another one of those storms that makes you wish you'd stayed home. So if you're out there on the I-40, keep your headlights clean and your prayers ready." He smiled faintly, a habit he kept even when no one was listening. The old studio smelled of coffee grounds and dust. Posters of long-forgotten jazz bands yellowed on the walls. Outside, lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the parking lot where his beat-up Ford sat alone under the humming lights. Chuck rubbed his temples. The station had been his second home since the divorce, a quiet place where he could pretend the world was still tuned to him. But lately, even the airwaves seemed to lose interest. Call-ins had dwindled. His only company was the hum of the equipment and the occasional coyote howl from the hills. Then, out of nowhere, Line 2 lit up. He frowned. No one ever called this late. He flipped the switch. "You're live on Nightline. Who's with me tonight?" A hiss of static answered, then a voice, faint, crackling through interference. "You shouldn't be outside tonight." Chuck froze. The voice wasn't just familiar, it was his. He blinked, leaned closer to the mic. "Nice trick, whoever you are, but you sound a little too much like me." The line went dead. The red light above Line 2 flicked off. The only sound left was the soft hum beneath his feet, a vibration that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Outside, thunder roared so loud the windows shook. For a brief moment, Chuck thought he heard laughter, thin, distant, riding the echo of the storm. 15 minutes later, the rain had turned from heavy to biblical. Chuck poured another cup of stale coffee and replayed the call. The audio hissed, then replayed his own voice, his real one, live on the mic. Then came the second voice. "You shouldn't be outside tonight." He paused it there, scrubbing backward. The waveform looked strange, like 2 overlapping voices with different timing. The second one lagged just half a second behind the first, as if an echo had recorded in real time. But the inflection, the rhythm, it was him. He knew that tone too well. He tried to rationalize. Maybe someone spliced an old recording. Maybe a fan found a way to mimic him. But how could anyone have known he was live tonight? His slot wasn't even officially listed on the program schedule anymore. He leaned back, staring at the walls. The humming sound from earlier hadn't stopped. It had deepened, more resonant, like the building itself was breathing. He stood and walked toward the transmitter room at the back, The hallway was dimly lit, the floor slick with tracked-in rain. Each step echoed louder than it should have. He reached the transmitter cabinet. The dials glowed faint orange. Signal strength, off the charts. Stronger than ever before. Too strong. He turned one of the knobs down. The hum grew louder. He turned it the other way. Louder still. It wasn't coming from the equipment. It was coming from inside the walls. Then, from the control room, he heard his own voice again. Not through the playback system, through the live mic. "All right, folks," it said cheerfully. "We're keeping you company tonight while the thunder dances." Chuck sprinted back. The mic was on, the on-air light red. He hadn't said a word. The broadcast was speaking by itself. The voice continued to talk. Chuck stood frozen as it carried on, casual, calm, word for word repeating the same opening lines he'd spoken half an hour ago. "It's another wild night in Flagstaff, and I'm here with you through every drop of rain." He reached to cut the feed. Nothing happened. The buttons didn't respond. The mixer lights flickered like candle flames. He pulled the main power switch. Dead. The voice went on. Chuck's reflection in the soundproof glass stared back at him, but something about it felt off. The figure behind the glass wasn't copying his movements anymore. When Chuck stepped left, the reflection lingered a moment before following. When he leaned closer, it smiled. The broadcast kept rolling, and now, in the background of the voice, he could hear faint static, crackling like distant breathing. He turned the monitor volume down. The breathing got louder. He grabbed the emergency phone, dialing the engineer, Jim Bailey, who lived 2 miles away. Jim's voice came through, half asleep. "Chuck, you know what time it is? There's something wrong with the system, man. The broadcast's playing my voice, live, but I'm not speaking." Jim sighed. "Storm's probably screwing with the signal. I'll check the tower in the morning." "No, you don't get it." Then Chuck heard it. A faint delay on the line. His own words repeating a half second after he said them. "You don't get it." Jim fell silent. "Are you doing that?" "I'm not." "Then who the hell—" The line cut to static. Lightning flashed so bright it turned the room white. When the light settled, the reflection in the glass wasn't there anymore, but the mic was still on. And from it came his own voice, soft, close, almost whispering into his ear. "I'm here now." By 3:12 a.m., the station was a cage of noise and light. The hum had grown constant, a low vibration that crawled through the air vents. The storm outside had mellowed to a steady drizzle, but inside, it felt like pressure was building, something invisible pressing against the walls. Chuck sat on the floor of the studio, headset off, microphone dead. He couldn't bring himself to touch the controls again. The on-air light glowed steadily above the console, mocking him. Then came the knock. 3 raps on the side door, not urgent, patient. "Jim?" he called. "That you?" No answer. The knocks came again, this time from the front, then from behind. He turned in a slow circle, breath shallow. The walls seemed to vibrate with each sound. He went to the lobby door and looked through the small glass panel. Lightning flashed, revealing a figure standing just beyond the lot, head tilted up toward the window. Chuck's stomach turned. The man was him. Same jacket, same scuffed boots, same tired face. He stumbled back. No, 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 no. The figure lifted a hand and pointed at the studio door. The hum spiked, deep enough to make the floor buzz under his shoes. The door handle rattled once, then turned slowly on its own. Rain hissed in through the crack. Chuck lunged and slammed it shut, locking it. His hands shook uncontrollably. He turned and froze. The glass wall that separated the studio from the control room had fogged over. On the other side, in the fog, was the imprint of a hand, and then another. Then a face pressed gently against the glass, smiling. His face. The monitors erupted in static. His voice poured through every speaker at once, layered, overlapping, 100 Chucks whispering the same thing again and again. "Keep them company, Chuck. Keep them company. Keep them—" The power blew out. Silence. Morning came golden and clean. The desert always forgot its storms quickly. Jim Bailey arrived at the station just after 8, grumbling about the downed lines. The front door was unlocked. The studio smelled faintly of ozone and burnt wiring. "Chuck," he called. No answer. He followed muddy footprints down the hallway. One pair, bare feet, leading toward the transmitter room. Inside, the main board was glowing, though the power grid was completely offline. Jim stared. The on-air light was red. The radio feed hummed faintly through the monitors. Then, from the speakers, came Chuck's voice. Calm, steady, exactly as it always sounded. "All right, folks. It's another wild night in Flagstaff. If you're out there on I-40, take it slow." Jim blinked. He knew that recording. It was from last night's log, but the system wasn't connected to any playback source. He checked the drive. Empty. The transmitter had no signal. The broadcast wasn't coming from the station. It was coming to it. The voice continued, looping perfectly. Then, after the third repetition, something new slipped through the static. A faint whisper, almost swallowed by the hum. "I'm not outside anymore." Jim turned off the system and backed away slowly. But even after the room went dark, the voice lingered faintly, vibrating through the floorboards. That night, truckers passing through Flagstaff reported catching a strange AM frequency. A man's voice, calm and warm, talking about the weather, sometimes warning listeners not to go outside. They said the signal came strongest when lightning touched down. And sometimes, between the thunderclaps, if you listened close enough, you could hear the other voices breathing beneath his.